Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
Why do you want to be US ambassador to the EU? I mean, you're clearly not a great fan of Brussels or its bureaucrats like Jean-Claude Juncker.
Well, I had in a previous career a diplomatic post where I helped to bring down the Soviet Union. So maybe there's another union that needs a little taming.
Mr. Leinen, you have the floor.
Mr. President, I would like to ask you to take contact with Commission and Council in order to push for the refusal of the accreditation of the designated US ambassador, Ted Malloch. Mr. Malloch has shown extreme hostility towards the European Union and the core idea of European integration. I think he should be persona non grata in Brussels. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole Farage.
Thank you. Mr. Farage.
President, thank you. Can I just respond to the somewhat bizarre communist intervention from the German member Joe Leinen, who wants us to ban and bar. Oh, isn't this just the European House of Democracy? So you shout me down before I've even said anything. Well, Mr. President, these people's minds aren't very open. Can I just point out that it would be somewhat bizarre to bar and ban Ted Roosevelt Malloch from any engagement with the European Union, given that he hasn't even been appointed yet?
Ms. Gomes.
Mr. President, besides supporting my colleague Joe Leinen in his request that the person designated as ambassador to the EU will not be accepted, I want to hear you, Mr. President, as President of this Parliament, on behalf of this Parliament, to clearly condemn as illegal and against international law and our principles as allies the measures that President Trump has announced in the US, banning Muslims and from certain countries as racist, xenophobic, discriminatory and inviting terror reactions.
Can I just say, this outpouring of liberal left grief, we've not seen the like of it. Were you outpouring, were you marching on the streets when President Obama proposed this ban on these 11 countries? No, it's a 90 days moratorium. Where are you marching on the streets? You're not.
No, it is not because he is elected that he can go against human values and the values of the United States of America. Even an elected president with a majority, and he has no majority of the popular vote in the US, have to listen to the American Constitution, has to listen to the American judiciary. Because it's not only about this religious ban. It's about, fueling populism and nationalism for the moment, what the Trump administration is doing. And that's not only by appointing Mr. Farage as his spokesman here in the plenary, but it's also by having the idea to designate Malloch as the ambassador, and more important, let's be aware of that, Steve Bannon, member now of the National Security Council of the United States of America, a man who is openly saying we want a worldwide right-wing movement to get rid of the European Union, to get done with the European Union, and there they are sitting here. It's our fifth column, the fifth column, because Mr. Farage is working with Mr. Bannon. He sees him on a regular basis to, in fact, one thing, that's to see how the European Union can be destroyed in the coming years. We got already in the 20th century people who thought that nationalism and populism was the solution for our continent. And they have created the gruesome atrocities we have ever seen. 20 million deaths, Mr. Farage, have nationalism caused in Europe. Take Roosevelt, for example. He wanted to be the leader of the free world. I'm now seeing an American president who wants to be the leader of the fight against the free world.
When Mr. Trump signed his decree to stop the travel of Muslim citizens, it was the 27th of January, and it wasn't a matter of chance. It was quite deliberate, because on the same day he insulted a person who talked about his ancestors dying in a concentration camps, and he said he knew what it was like when people were being persecuted for their beliefs, and Trump said he was a bad actor.
Mr. Pittella, thank you very much, President. Well, let's tell the truth. Some people thought that Trump would basically be a joke. Instead of that, he's revealing himself to be a nightmare. Historically, when we've underestimated things and people, then we've ended up with dictators, people who have caused war and shed blood. This travel ban, these measures that are being taken by Trump, these are an attack on the European legal civilization. This is an attack, together with other things, the wall on the border with Mexico. This is an international country that's going to damage its relations with Mexico, with Latin America. The whole world's being affected by this virus that's being sown. This is a populist lie. Some people are being banned, others aren't. It basically depends on who Trump does business with. Joe Leinen's right here, as is Manfred Weber, when they say, well, if this ambassador were appointed, well, then he wouldn't be welcome, because I can't welcome someone who, even before they're appointed, says, I'm going there to destroy the European Union. Let me say to Mrs. May, to the UK government, do not play the Trojan horse to destroy the European Union. But until Trump changes his line, the doors of Europe need to be closed in his face. Thank you.
It's already been indicated today that there may be a new ambassador coming. We have one already. We have Nigel Farage here, but apparently it's another one going to come along. They're talking about the great independence of the UK so that they don't have to be part of the EU. But on behalf of my group, I would say that if we have to welcome an ambassador from the US who wants to see the end of the EU and who wants to see the end of the euro, then that person cannot be accredited. We cannot work with somebody like that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Farage now, on behalf of the FDD group.
Thank you. Well, I can see that you're all very upset here this afternoon, and I've no doubt that the events in the USA over the last few weeks have been a very profound shock to you. Perhaps you're right. You see, what has happened here is somebody has stood on a manifesto for election, got into office, and within 1 week said that he will hold faith with his own electorate. It is called genuine democracy. Unlike the system we have in the European Union, where the unelected commissioners like Mogherini here have the sole right to propose legislation. So I'm sure that it's a great shock to you to see that a genuinely elected Democrat is doing what he was put in to do. And it must be, I would think today in Washington. Sorry. I can't hear you, mate.
Di questo Parlamento e delle funzioni istituzionali.
This Parliament has institutional functions, as does the Commission, out of institutional respect to the Commission, but also as a result of the Commissioner's President. We need to be polite, please. So, thank you.
And out of institutional respect, President, to the truth, perhaps you will understand and agree with me that within the European form of lawmaking, it is the unelected Commission that have the sole right to propose legislation. If I'm wrong in saying that, you can throw me out of this Parliament right here, right now, this afternoon.
Mr. Farage, I am just asking you to be a little bit more respectful, please. Thank you. You may continue.
Oh, I'll be respectful, all right. And perhaps you will be too, for the right of the leader of a political party that won the European elections in the United Kingdom in 2014. Now, it seems to me that actually, with all the anti-Trump rhetoric that is coming from everywhere, actually what we're hearing is the true nature of the European project, which is genuine anti-Americanism. Trump is motivated by protecting the United States of America from Islamic terrorism, whereas what has happened in this room and in governments around Europe is you have welcomed these people into your own homes. But can we please, just for a moment, look at the facts? Amongst all the hyperbole and the hysteria, All that Donald Trump has done is taken 7 countries that were identified by President Obama as posing a risk to the USA. Obama already had put in place extreme vetting. What Trump has done is for 90 days to say, let's examine that vetting and see whether it's good enough. But I want to ask you, Mr. Verhofstadt, and all the others, with your faux outrage today, where were you when Obama in 2011 banned any Iraqi from going into the country for 6 months? Why do I hear no criticism in this chamber or from the Commission of Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain and others who refuse to take a single, not one, refugee or displaced person from Syria? And how can it be that on Holocaust Day, last Friday, not a single one of you criticised the 16 countries in the world that ban Israeli Jews from even going to their country on holiday? What is this hypocrisy? So perhaps what we need to do, Mr. President, and through you to the members, perhaps what we need to do is to be a little bit more constructive. All of us here say we're Democrats. Well, here's a chance to prove it. Let us invite President Trump to come here to this European Parliament. I'm sure as Democrats you'd all agree that what we need to do is to have an open dialogue with the newly elected, most powerful man in the world. And if you throw that rejection back in my face, then you prove yourself to be the anti-democratic zealots that I always thought you were.
Could we have a microphone for the speaker, please?
Grazie, onorevole Verhofstadt.
Thank you, Mr. Verhofstadt. Mr. de Graaff now for the ENF group, please.
Mr. Tusk recently said that the United States of America is as great a threat to the EU as Russia and Islamic State. Is Mr. Tusk suffering from irrational anxiety, from panic attacks that disturb his view on reality? President Trump has rightfully introduced a temporary stop on the entry of citizens from countries that were already identified by his predecessor, Mr. Obama, and Mr. Farage said that already, as countries that pose a threat to US security. His argument to improve border controls before allowing people to enter is completely valid. In the EU, we are directly suffering from the consequences of a failing border control. We have suffered attacks in Brussels, Nice, Paris and Berlin, and many lost their lives or were severely injured. Trump called the EU a mess, and he's right. It is a mess. And the outcry against President Trump is pure hypocrisy. Mr. Farage already said that. Where was the protest against the exclusion of Israeli citizens by the same Islamic countries that are now banned from the United States? You should be ashamed of jeopardizing the lives of EU citizens because of the failing border controls in the EU. And I call upon Mr. Tusk and upon the Commission to follow the example of President Trump. Install national border control. Keep jihadists out, not just from the 7 countries that President Trump singled out, but of many more that are responsible for the wave of illegal migrants in the EU. Thank you.